Hi, this is Tom Harper with Avidyne, and this is what you need to know about ADS-B. We're going to cover the definition, what is ADS-B? Do I have to equip with ADS-B? What ADS-B solutions are best for you? And finally, what ADS-B solutions are there from Avidyne that best fit your aircraft? First of all, what is ADS-B? ADS-B stands for Automatic Dependent Surveillance Broadcast. It's automatic, meaning the messages are sent out periodically without interrogation, unlike transponders. It's dependent, meaning it's dependent on your GPS. ADS-B requires a WAAS GPS to provide position and velocity. If you lose your GPS, you'll lose your ADS-B, so it is dependent on WAAS GPS. It's primarily for surveillance. It provides radar services for ATC, for aircraft separation, just like the old system, but it's going to be much more precise. And it's a broadcast, meaning that the messages are sent out to everyone, not just to specific receivers. What's the difference between ADS-B in and ADS-B out? Well, ADS-B out is the ability to transmit information from the aircraft to ground stations and other equipped aircraft. ADS-B out is what is required by the mandates. There's also ADS-B in, which is your ability as an aircraft owner to install a receiver that can listen and receive the transmissions from other aircraft ADS-B. And also listen to ground station signals as well. So that's not mandated, but it provides the most benefit to the pilots. Here's some acronyms that you should know. There's ADS-B, we just mentioned. There's also ADS-R, which is Automatic Dependent Surveillance Rebroadcast. There's TIS-B, which is the Traffic Information Service Broadcast, different than the old TIS transponders. There's FIS-B, which is your Flight Information Service Broadcast, which is the free weather you've heard about. You'll hear a term called CDTI, which means Cockpit Display of Traffic Information. For most of us in GA, that means your GPS display or your multifunction display. You'll hear the word 1090 ES, which is the Extended Squitter Mode S Transponder, a 1090 megahertz ADS-B data link. And then there's a second data link channel called UAT, or Universal Access Transceiver, which operates on the 978 megahertz band. So why is ADS-B even being deployed? Well, first of all, the FAA is using the technology that's now available to modernize the U.S. airspace as part of their next-gen air transport system. It provides increased accuracy, increased safety, increased efficiency in the national airspace. You're also seeing ADS-B being adopted internationally as well for similar reasons. A big one is it's significantly lower cost to install, maintain, and operate the ADS-B systems for ground stations. So what's in it for me as a pilot? Well, increased safety. Okay, you're transmitting your highly precise GPS position continually, so we know exactly where you are versus about where you are at any time. The radar sweeps, the updates are faster than the old radar sweeps of an old secondary surveillance radar. That's going to allow ATC to be more efficient with putting more aircraft in the airspace, but also in how they vector you, and you're going to get radar contact much earlier as you're climbing out because of the better ADS-B coverage as well. Because you're transmitting your precision GPS position, you're going to have an improved last position data, which will be very helpful in the event of a search and rescue operation. And as we know, in any of those type of events, minutes are the difference between life and death sometimes. So that's awfully good benefit. There's also the advantage of free weather, which we've heard about. So why do we have separate 1090 megahertz and 978 megahertz channels? There were three main reasons for these dual links. One was the assumption that there was going to be frequency congestion on the 1090 megahertz channel. Back when ADS-B was conceptualized, there was concerns about a dramatic growth in U.S. air traffic and fleet growth, as much as 2 to 3 times over the next 25 years. And there was concern that because all these aircraft are using transponders, a good percentage of them have either a TCAS system or a TAS, which is a traffic advisory system. They're all using products that utilize the 1090 megahertz frequency, and that there would be frequency saturation. So they decided to come up with a second band called the UAT, which gives pilots another channel, but it's also designed from the ground up to support this free weather option. The 1090 megahertz channel, which was developed many years ago, that protocol does not support the ability to send large packets of data, weather data up to the airplane. But the UAT was designed from the ground up to do just that. So this gives folks the ability to get free weather. It was targeted primarily at the light GA market, because there is a mandate that if you're flying above 18,000 feet, you have to have a 1090 solution. If you're flying below 18,000 feet, you can have either a 1090 or a 978. Again, the 1090 is the same frequency as most transponders, or all transponders. Mode S transponders send out additional ADS-B information on the extended squitter data stream that adds the GPS position and velocity information. And 1090 is the international standard. Outside of the U.S., everybody else will be using 1090. Within the U.S. only, you can use 1090 or 978. There's less crowding on the 978 channel. It has additional bandwidth for the FIS-B, the free weather. So that's a big advantage in the U.S. So let's look at how these systems work. This is a picture of how the current air traffic control system works in terms of communicating with your transponder. The ground radar, your secondary surveillance radar, sends out an interrogation pulse on 1030 megahertz. It's blasted out each sweep. Any aircraft within range of that radar receives that signal, that 1030 megahertz signal, and then transmits back and replies on 1090 megahertz. That information is sent down to a scope that the operator can see all the aircraft within their controlled airspace, and they can manage them accordingly. Now, there are also TCAS systems out in the world and traffic advisory systems that have the ability, they basically act like a ground-based radar in the air. They transmit out interrogation pulses on the 1030 megahertz frequency. All the other transponders nearby here get that interrogation pulse, and then they reply back to the TCAS and say, yep, here I am on 1090. So the TCAS acts like a ground-based radar, and it takes in all those replies, and then it puts up a screen showing all the nearby traffic for each of those systems. Back in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was a system called the Traffic Information Service, and that if you bought one of these TIS transponders, I think there was a KT-73, I think Garmin had a GTX 330, they were a TIS transponder, and that allowed you to receive this traffic information service if you were in a terminal radar area that offered that service, which was typically a 55 nautical mile range around the highly populated terminal areas across the U.S. So what would happen is if you flew into that terminal area, when the ground station was sending out those interrogation pulses, they were encoded with all the traffic that they were seeing on their scope was sent up on the 1030 megahertz frequency, if you had a TIS transponder, you could decode that information and display it on your multifunction display in the cockpit and get a good idea of the number of aircraft around you during an approach or departure, which was really nice and added a low-cost safety solution for a lot of aircraft that couldn't afford a TCAS at the time. Now this TIS system is being phased out now. And remember, it's different than TIS-B we're going to talk about. This TIS is traffic information sent up on 1030 megahertz. There are a few places around the country. I understand it's still available in the LA basin as an example. But TIS is being phased out. If you have one of those old transponders, you won't be getting ADS-B traffic on it without updating that transponder to something else. So what's going on with ADS-B? Each aircraft is automatically transmitting their position and aircraft ID and velocity. Altitude is all being transmitted out once a second. Ground station listens for that and it paints it on the screen. Aircraft that have ADS-B-in receivers can eavesdrop and listen for those signals from other aircraft. So here's an example of an ADS-B equipped aircraft. He's got ADS-B in, so he can hear the ADS-B out from each of these three aircraft right here. Paint them on his screen. However, in the U.S., our mandate can be met by using a 1090 ADS-B out at all altitudes, or a 978 below 18,000 feet. So in this illustration, you can see these high flyers here, certainly all the airlines, the most corporate aircraft, they're going to have TCAS on board, and they're going to be transmitting their ADS-B out on 1090 megahertz. And in a lot of airplanes below 18,000 might be using a 978 megahertz ADS-B out, and that'll be transmitted to the ground station. They'll be able to assimilate all that information and put it on the scope. But the use of the two different frequencies can restrict communication between the aircraft. So what that means is this aircraft can hear other 1090 aircraft, but it can't hear these 978 aircraft or this non-participating aircraft. Conversely, this 978 guy can't hear the 1090 guys. So that's where ADS-R comes in. ADS-R solves this communication issue by rebroadcasting the information from each frequency onto the other frequency. So let's take you through that. So in that case, these 1090 operators are sending their ADS-B down to the ground station. It's received, and their position information is rebroadcast up on 978 to this customer. So now he can see both of these aircraft indirectly instead of directly. Conversely, these guys, the high flyers at 1090, can see the 978 guy because it's rebroadcast on 1090. So one of the things that happens is there's still especially right now, before the mandate of December 31st, 2019, and even after the mandate date, January 1st, there's going to be a lot of non-ADS-B aircraft. In other words, they're non-participating. There's still going to be secondary surveillance radars around the country. There's just not going to be as many, and there's not going to be the redundancy, so that will help lower their cost. But because, if you lose GPS, you lose ADS-B, so they need a backup system, which is the old SSR, and there's going to be non-participating aircraft, so they still need an SSR. So if you're flying around with an older aircraft that doesn't have ADS-B, you still got a Mode AC transponder, those aircraft were going to be interrogated the old-fashioned way. They'll send out a pulse, the transponder will reply. The ground stations will now rebroadcast that non-participating aircraft on 978 and 1090, and that's called TIS-B. Again, different than the old TIS traffic we talked about, which, remember, was on a 1030 megahertz frequency. TIS-B is 978 and 1090, broadcast of the same information on both channels, so that all of these folks up here can see the non-participating aircraft that happen to be in an airspace near them. So that's what TIS-B is. Then there's FIS-B, which is the free weather we talked about. That's only if you have a 978 receiver. FIS-B is not available on the 1090 channel. FIS-B is a ground-based service which may have line-of-sight issues, so if you're used to flying with a XM or a Sirius satellite weather solution in which you can get your satellite weather updates while you're on the ground for the whole continental U.S., FIS-B is a little more limited. It's perfectly fine for most GA pilots who maybe even couldn't afford an XM type solution before. The FIS-B has range and resolution restrictions, so you're not going to necessarily get the whole continental U.S. You usually will get about a 200-mile radius around your airplane. Perfectly adequate for most GA applications. But it is different than what you're used to with an XM solution. Well, do you have to equip and when? Well, the short answer is yeah, you have to. If you're flying in any of the Class A, B, or C airspaces, you have to have ADS-B out in order to fly on January 1st, 2020 and beyond. Class E airspace above 10,000 feet. Well, let me just blow this screen up here, and you can see the easiest way to think about this is if it was an airspace that required a Mode C transponder in today's airspace, after December 31st of 2019, you'll have to have ADS-B out. So you can see there are airspaces where ADS-B is still not going to be required. But again, if you're flying any IFR for that matter, going into any of the bigger airports, you're going to have it. And certainly any high flyers. If you're above 18,000 feet, you definitely have to have it. So what about the mandates? Well, certainly in the U.S. here, we mentioned that the mandate is 2020. Excuse me, January 1st. Canada has actually had an ADS-B mandate for high-flying aircraft since 2009. And what that's done is that's given them the ability to have radar coverage essentially over the huge Hudson Bay area for these transatlantic airplanes. Over in Europe, they revised the mandate, but it's primarily focused on heavy aircraft, high-flying aircraft, fast-moving aircraft, and new aircraft are already under the mandate, and retrofit aircraft are June of 2020. And then Australia has a mandate as well, which is already passed for high-flying aircraft. Now, a lot of these European countries, and also like Mexico, Latin America, they're all looking at potential mandates for the low-flying GA-type aircraft. But like in Australia, in Canada, they're saying, while there's not a mandate for the low-flying aircraft, the GA airplanes, at this time, if you have ADS-B equipage now, you will get preferential treatment. You might not be sent off to a hold because they can't manage your as accurately as they can the ADS-B airplane. So it's to your benefit if you're doing an update to maybe go ahead and do it in order to get preferential treatment on your separation. So what ADS-B solution is best for you? The way I like to think about it is, if you can answer these three questions, your solution will become fairly obvious. First of all, what is your GPS? What is your plan for GPS? Are you flying with a panel-mounted WASP GPS? Are you kind of a VFR guy, don't care about YFR, don't care about shooting WASP approaches? That's going to affect your ADS-B equipage solution. Do you want ADS-B in as well as ADS-B out? Do you want to be able to get the FIS-B weather? Do you want to get the TIS traffic? And of course, do you fly above 18,000 feet or outside the U.S.? Now, there are several customers, or a lot of customers, that say, I never fly above 18,000, but I've got a Mooney that's certified to 24 something or 25,000. While you may not fly above 18, it might affect the resale value of the airplane if you don't equip properly. Or you may not fly outside the U.S., but you might sell it to someone who's flying down to Mexico or up into Canada and would like to have full equipage. You might as well go ahead and equip. to cover that. In order to be compliant for ADS-B out, it requires two things: an approved GPS position source, so basically WAS in the US, and a way to transmit your position, either a 1090 ES or a UAT 978 data link. So you got to have those. ADS-B requires three things. You've got to have some kind of receiver to listen for the traffic and weather on 978 megahertz. You need a display of some kind to display the traffic and or weather. Otherwise, what's the point of having it? And the third thing is, in order to get ADS-B in, you have to be participating in ADS-B out. So there are some portables out there customers have been using for the last couple of years. Even though they don't have ADS-B out, they're basically eavesdropping and picking up the free weather you can get. But most importantly, it's the traffic because traffic is just not broadcast from the whole U.S. It's broadcast based on where you are. And if you don't participate, they're not going to necessarily send you all the traffic you need because you're eavesdropping on the traffic broadcast that was being sent to someone else. Convoluted story, but the short answer is if you really want accurate ADS-B in, you need to participate in ADS-B out. So what solution is right for you? Again, when it comes to GPS, what's the best GPS for how I fly? And I don't care about GPS. I plan on having a nice IFR GPS. I got one with I'm going to couple with an MFD, or I've got the MFD is basically built into the GPS. Also, when it comes to ADS-B, second question is, do I just want to be compliant? Am I trying to check the box and just do the cheapest ADS-B out solution I can come up with? Or do I want ADS-B in? Do I want ADS-B out? Do I want a nicer system that gives me all the benefits that are available? Another question, of course, is, am I a high flyer? Do I fly above 18,000? Am I flying internationally? That's going to affect your decision. And do I need a display? Do I have an MFD already? Am I looking at buying one of these integrated IFR GPSs, or do I have an iPad that's going to do that for me? What's my options? Well, when it comes to Avidyne, we have several options. We've got a whole line of panel-mounted GPS products, as you can see here. The IFD 550, notice it's got integrated synthetic vision. The IFD 540, it also offers a synthetic vision. And the 440. So these products are all slide-in replacements for legacy GNS 430 and 530. So if you've already got an airplane wired for a 430 or 530W, these products will slide right in. And it adds synthetic vision. They've got hybrid touch, meaning we've kept all the knobs and buttons, but we also have touchscreen capability. They have built-in Bluetooth and Wi-Fi, so they'll communicate with your iPad. You can, with ForeFlight, integrate with Flight Plan Go, several other third-party solutions. And also, they can provide the GPS position source if you've already got a GTX 330 ES or 335, a 345, or a Link system. Will provide the GPS position source that you need. If you want ADS-B in, Avidyne offers our SkyTrack 600 is our active traffic system. We call it TAS-A. That adds active traffic plus passive traffic, basically ADS-B in. And then we also are compatible with this the Free Flight Ranger that provides ADS-B in receive capability for weather and traffic. For out, Avidyne offers a panel mount and remote mount transponders that do 1090 ES. So they give you the out, and they use our panel-mounted GPS for position. Again, the displays, the 550, the 540, the 440. We offer an IFD 100 as an iPad app, and our existing EX series of MFDs are also compatible for ADS-B display of weather and traffic. So remember, when when you're thinking about ADS-B, answer these 3 questions and your solution will become fairly obvious. What's your GPS? Do you want ADS-B in as well as out? And do you fly above 18,000 feet or outside the U.S.? Avidyne has the solutions you need, and we're compatible with many third-party options as well. So we like to work well with others. If you have any additional questions, feel free to go to avidyne.com or give us a call at 800-AVIDYNE. Thanks and have a great day.